Hello, everyone. I'm going to begin my thoughts this morning with a reading from 1 John. I'm reading the epistle of 1 John, chapter 4, just some selected verses. And I'll be reading from the Message version. I love the way in which Eugene Peterson interprets this passage. But it also speaks to something I think we might take with us into 2021. So here's the reading. My beloved friends, let us continue to love each other, since love comes from God. Everyone who loves is born of God and experiences this intimate grounding in God. God is love, so when we take up permanent residence in a life of love, we live in God and God lives in us. This way, love has the run of the house, becomes at home and mature in us, so that we are free from worry or from judgment, and our standing in the world is identical with the Christ. There's no room for fear in love. Well-formed love banishes all fear. So I have a friend, Skip Johnson, who lives in north of Atlanta in Georgia. He's a pastor, Methodist pastor, and a professor at Candler School of Religion, teaches in the psychology area. And he always sends us Christmas cards. This one this year was particularly interesting. They usually have adventures that they've done throughout the year, but of course they couldn't do much of that this year. But one of the things this one was interesting was what it said on the cover, first of all. It was just a nondescript cover, but in bold print it said, "Will 2020 ever end?" And then in small print inside parentheses it said, "Oh, and yeah, Merry Christmas." When you open up the cover, though, that's what I thought that was interesting I want to share with you. He had placed a checklist for leaving 2020 behind, a wellness checklist for leaving 2020 behind. And then he listed these 4 questions, as you move from one relationship, one moment, one period of time in your life to the next. Are you ready? What are you taking from your experience now that will equip you for the future, kind of thing? And so he had this wellness checklist. Interesting questions to think about as we do the same. Are you able to step outside of chaos and still laugh at yourself? Is your imagination still intact and healthy? Can you appreciate the gift of wonder? As you move from this reality we've been in, can we still appreciate the gift of wonder? When we need that as we go into 2021. Have you learned how to avoid the drain of despair and the clutch of cynicism? That one's one I have to think about. I shared with a friend that this idea of it can't get away from 2020 fast enough. I am ready for the next year. But he kind of laughed at me and he kind of told me a joke. He said, "Yeah, really? This mess that we're in," that was his word, mess. I'm sorry, that wasn't his word, that's my word. He said, "This mess that we're in, it ain't over yet." He said, "Just think about it. We're going to have a 2021 and then a 2022 and then a 2023. And the fact is that they're all going to be 2020s. We could have 9 more years of this 2020 mess." And I laughed at the joke, but I realized too, there's some truth to that. There's some truth to this idea that if we're not aware, if we're not honestly assessing who we are in this time and how we've been, how will we move into the next time differently? What are we taking with us that can help to transform this new time and continue to be on this path of shalom that Linda and I have talked about for so long, this path of how we exist in right relationship with one another? The reality is it's been such a hard year. I agree. I can't wait to get past this experience. But the reality is also true that we're not going to move into something that's going to be beautiful and perfect and stress-free. We've still got this mess for some time. But how long depends on what we've learned. I think if we look back at the year, we can say we've learned a number of things. Certainly, we've become more aware of who we are in relationship to the injustices around us. And we become more aware of just how extreme those injustices are, those racial injustices, inequalities, and the violence. We become aware of our own involvement and our own relationship to health and to illness with this virus and with the environment. And yes, there have been so much trauma and there's been so much death around this. And I agree we could have prevented so much of the death, hundreds of thousands of deaths, and I'm sure we could have prevented some of that had we behaved differently. I know that. All of us, I speak universally. But at the same time, have we not also become aware of how resilient we can be when the proverbial rug is literally yanked out from under us? Finding new ways of being in work, finding new work that we didn't think would ever be possible or that we'd find interesting even. Finding new ways of relating to one another when we have to be socially distanced and when our venues are closed and our churches are closed. Finding new ways to engage. Even this. I mean, the reality is, I was telling Linda, I was never trained in this kind of acting on camera to pre-record a service. I have no idea what you're doing. I have none of the feedback that I was trained as a speaker, as a performer, and as a preacher. I was trained in that kind of reality, that interactive feedback. I don't get any of that. And so for all I know, you're doing dishes or you're working on a project or you heard the song and now you've moved to the other side of the house. You'll be back in a few minutes to see if the next song is happening. I have no idea. I presume that you're there and I act as if I wasn't trained to do that. And yet I've developed some sense of comfort, if not competency, but certainly some level of comfort with it. That's what I mean, we take away some gifts in spite of the tragedies that we've experienced both collectively and personally, and some very close to home. But still, I have to say, what concerns me is that I feel like I'm not ready to move. I'm not ready for us to move on. In fact, I'm kind of angry about it. I just don't think we're there yet, and I'm getting angry with what I'm seeing around me. Not simply angry because of the personal loss, but angry because it feels like we're still not there. I feel like Till Eulenspiegel, the German folk hero who was kind of a foolish wise one. His wisdom was in his foolishness, right? And so the Till Eulenspiegel has a story about him. He was making his pilgrimage up a mountain with other pilgrims, and they had a multi-day journey ahead of them to go to this cathedral. And as they're going up this mountainside, it's getting steeper and steeper, and the steeper it gets, the more jovial and lighthearted Till Eulenspiegel seems to be. While meanwhile, the other pilgrims are feeling exhausted and beat up. And finally, when they get to the top, they notice that Till is now getting sad, and they're saying, Till, what's the matter with you? You come up the mountain, you're happy, but here we're at the top, we've reached the top, it's successful, it's a beautiful view, and now you're sad. And he looks back and he says, oh yeah, it's a beautiful view, sure. But have you noticed the mountains that are still ahead of us? There's this wisdom in the journey is up and down. The bigger picture is a mix. It's life is messy. It's complex. How do we move through it with a sense of presence and purpose? The ups and downs. That's really what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like we're not ready for that. I'm feeling like Greg Fokker in that scene of Meet the Parents. You remember, Linda and I talked about this way back at the beginning of the pandemic. We brought up this scene, and we thought we'd only have a few more months before it was all over with, and yet here we are. And that's that scene where Greg, played by Ben Stiller, Greg and his father-in-law and his father, they're arguing in the jail cell, and they're fighting, and then each one of them from their own perspective, they're not hearing each other clearly. And the guard comes over and he's about to open it. The judge says, "Let him on out of there." And Greg walks over to the door to the jail, and he grabs the bars and slams it shut with him still in it. And he looks at the guard and says, "We're not done here yet." That's what it feels like. We're not done here yet. So I want to offer a song in just a minute, and it's a song by Guy Clark, but it comes to mind right now as we're thinking about how we make this move from 2020 into 2021. And it's a bit of a leap, I think, because it's risky and it requires a kind of a way of unknowing, kind of a way of seeing things new and possible, even when it seems like it's not there. A leap, if you will. And so I started singing this song at camps. And it's a song that Guy Clark wrote. And I started noticing this girl at one of the camps where I'd been singing this song. I was invited to come to the cabin. And this girl named Laramie Wilson. She was about 10 years old, and she had lined up the bunks in her cabin. It's a high ceiling cabin. She'd lined them up a little further apart than normal, about 4 feet apart as opposed to 3. And the kids in the cabin, the other girls, were just watching as she was leaping from one bunk to the next, screaming out, "Don't forget your cape! Don't forget your cape! Don't forget your cape!" And the counselors kind of laughed and said, "You see what your song's doing." And this was the song that I sang. When now he's 8 years old with the flower sack cape tied all around his neck, standing up on top of the garage, and he's figuring what the heck. Screwed his courage up so tight, well, the whole thing came unwound. He got a running start, and bless his little heart, he headed straight for the ground. 'Cause he's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. Spread your wings and hold your breath, and always trust your cape. Grown up with that flour sack cape tied all around his dreams, full of piss and vinegar, and he's just busting at the seams. Stuck his finger up in the air, said it's gonna be do or die, and he wasn't afraid of nothing, and he figured that he could fly. He's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. You hold your breath, spread your wings, and always trust that cape. Now he's old and gray with that flour sack cape still tied around his head, and jumping off of garages all his life probably will be till he's dead. And all his friends just saying he was acting like a kid. Well, he did not know that he could not fly, and so he did. 'Cause he was one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. Gotta hold your breath and spread your wings, and always trust your cape. Said he's one of those who knows that life is just a leap of faith. You hold your breath, spread your arms, don't forget that cape. So I hope you enjoyed that song. I love singing that song, even today. I sang it at all the camps for years, this Guy Clark song. And it was always been a song that I figured was really for adults, right? Because adults are really about this sort of loss of innocence, this loss of curiosity and wonder and sort of trust in making the leaps that life often requires in some of the most difficult times. And yet the kids really identified with it, obviously, because I think instinctively, what kids were doing in these camps, what I was seeing was most of these kids would face their mortality, their more immediate sense of mortality, with this sense of, every moment's important. And not simply important, but possible, filled with all sorts of experience that hasn't happened yet. So they would see things as new. Most of the kids. Some of the kids still approach things with fear and anxiety, or with judgment, or with their own parents' anxieties. But most of these kids would just, for example, on the platform at the top of the zip line, they'd just take that leap. 40, 50 feet up above the ground, 100 yards out and over a valley, and they would just leap. Adults, on the other hand, would find themselves sitting on that platform for a long time before they would finally let go and step off. Eventually, I started seeing at the top of the platforms of the posts, I'd see scratched into the wooden post, "Don't forget your cape. Don't forget your cape." What was, for me, it was this idea of what is the cape? What is that security that helps us leap into these unknown possibilities, or to leap into this learning, this enlightenment that frees us up? Where we find ourselves, like the questions that my friend was asking at the beginning, where we find ourselves more overwhelmed with cynicism, or more overwhelmed with despair, like Till Eulenspiegel as he looks at the mountains ahead. What about that cape inspires that leap? And I want to suggest to you, as we wrap things up this morning, I want to suggest that as we go into 2021, that we go in with a sense of beginner's mind. And beginner's mind it comes out of the Zen tradition, but it's really something that's found in religious traditions around the world as a part of the faith journey. In beginner's mind, in fact, there's a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind that Suzuki wrote. It's a great book. And in it, he has a quote. He says, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are only a few." You understand what that's saying? I mean, with a beginner, everything's possible. What would it be like to enter all of our moments as a beginner? All the experiences are possible. Everything is new. Let go of our presumptions. Let go of the assumptions, the judgments that we bring to the anxiety, the fear. In my mind, that's what the scripture verse was talking about, that love casts out all fear, because love is this leap of the beginner's mind. It's this leap into the connection that says all sorts of possibilities are there. As we speak about it, the redemptive possibilities that are there, the way in which God, in the ground of being, the very root of possibilities for wholeness, for right relationship, for joy, for delight, all of that is present in our moments, but it requires that beginner's mind, that entering into these moments with a sense of sort of curiosity. I called love in this last series of hope, joy, peace, and love, I called love curiosity. This intentional, attentive engagement with the moments, with the experiences. That's curiosity, right? And that's what these kids would bring into all of their moments as they would leap and shout out, "Don't forget your cape. Don't forget beginner's mind." Or the way Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic, called it. He called it seeing things strange. In other words, seeing them as something new. Imagine cooking your breakfast as if you were doing it for the first time. What would that be like to do that? Imagine a conversation with your spouse or your partner as if it's for the first time. Each moment as if there's something there you don't know. What would that be like to enter our moments with beginner's mind, and then to carry that into these challenges that we face ourselves? We've already made up so many judgments about our experiences that have been understandably difficult and harsh and traumatic. And yet, how do we enter these moments with a bit of beginner's mind that begins to see what else is possible? What redemptive possibilities are there? We continue to fight for injustice, but how do we reach out in compassion? That's really what it means to be in the heart of love, what I think it means to be in the heart of God, as chapter 4 in 1 John suggests. It suggests this idea that we are participating with this creativity, with this curiosity, with beginner's mind. We are participating in the redemptive possibilities. Hannah Arendt, the philosopher poet, she put it this way. She said, "The things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them." We learn by loving. We love by loving. We learn to give by giving. We experience the gift and gratitude of giving by giving. We experience the curiosity of life by curiously engaging with life. We have to approach these things with this idea of beginner, so that even the anxieties that Till Eulenspiegel feels, as we move from this year into next year, can we move in that with this sense of wonder still intact? Can we move into that with this sense of imagination still fresh and alive? Can we move into this next year with this ability to let go of the grip of despair and cynicism? Can we do that? It requires this leap, this beginner's mind of approaching things. And so, I'm still angry. I'm still going to enter these moments with anger. I can't deny that. I'm still going to see the ups and downs. I still wonder and am anxious about whether or not we're ready as a community, as a culture, to move into this next year? Have we really left? Maybe we're not done here yet. But I'm also deeply in love, right? I'm in love with life. I am. I'm in love with you. I'm in love with our community. I'm in love with this process of faith and spirituality. And so I'm going to go into this reality in pieces, as we all do, as we always do. We go in pieces. Life is upended. Hope gets suspended. And yet, in spite of all of that, we still are knitted and mended together, always into something new. A life that is larger than our illusions and our confusion and is still grounded in love. So we go. We go forward in pieces. But in our unraveling, may we find and may we be reminded, and may we remind one another, we are all unraveling and traveling in this journey together. Happy New Year.